They signed her up not out of encouragement but out of cruelty. Mira, poor, quiet, and invisible to most, had never so much as raised her hand in class, let alone stood beneath the bright glare of a stage spotlight. Yet here she was, alone, no music, no backing track, no friendly face cheering her on. Just silence. The auditorium was packed. Students whispered and nudged each other, barely containing their laughter. They expected a disaster, a joke, and Mira was the punchline. She stood motionless, heart pounding, lips trembling. The air hung heavy with tension, and then something unexpected happened. From the farthest row at the back, a figure slowly rose. An elderly woman, bent with age, calloused hands, eyes softened by time. She was the janitor, someone no one really noticed. Day after day, she'd swept these very floors unnoticed, unheard. But today, she stepped into the light, Mrs. Evelyn. Without a word, she walked toward the stage, her shoes echoing through the silent hall. She carried no grandeur, no authority, just quiet strength. She sat at the dusty old piano, the one students usually ignored, and gently placed her fingers on the keys. What happened next silenced the auditorium, and perhaps for a brief moment the entire world. One girl, one woman, two souls separated by time but united by something deeper, music. As Mrs. Evelyn played, Mira found her voice. It started as a whisper, shaky and fragile. But slowly, it grew steady, haunting, beautiful. The kind of voice that reached into people and pulled at something long buried. There was no laughter now, no smirks, no mocking whispers, just stillness, just awe. What began as a cruel joke became a moment no one would forget. A performance that didn't just entertain, it transformed. The story you're about to hear will move you. Perhaps it will bring tears. But more than anything, it will remind you of the quiet power of kindness, of music, and of the small miracles the world too often overlooks. Before we follow the extraordinary journey of Mira and Mrs. Evelyn, ask yourself, do you believe that true worth lies not in appearance, wealth, or popularity, but in resilience, in hidden talent, and in the simple act of showing up when it matters? If so, please like and subscribe so we can share more stories that shine a light on hearts like theirs. Now, let us return to Eldon Creek, a small town where autumn paints the maple trees gold, and where life is peaceful, familiar, but not always fair. This is where our story begins. In a tiny wooden house with a rusted tin roof on the very edge of town lived 12-year-old Mira Lane. She had lost her mother to cancer when she was only 8. Since then, her father, a quiet, hard-working mechanic, had done his best to raise her alone. They didn't have much. No smartphones, no trendy clothes. Mira wore thick glasses and kept her hair tied back with a faded elastic band. Her shoes were scuffed, and her backpack had patches sewn by hand. At school, she was the girl most forgot. During recess, she would sit alone in the far corner of the schoolyard, nose buried in a borrowed library book. Her favorite comfort wasn't company, but memory. She would quietly hum lullabies her mother used to sing to her at bedtime. Gentle melodies that kept her heart steady in a world that didn't seem to notice her. Every year, Eldon Middle School held a big event, the Talent Assembly, a day when students could take the stage to sing, dance, tell jokes, or show off whatever made them special. For most, it was a chance to shine, but for Mira, it became something else entirely. But for kids like Mira, the annual Talent Assembly wasn't an exciting opportunity. It was just a long morning spent sitting quietly in the audience, clapping politely while others soaked in applause. She never dreamed of stepping on that stage, not because she didn't have dreams, but because she had long been taught, in 100 silent ways, that they weren't meant for girls like her. What Mira didn't know was that a group of older students, boys and girls who had never once spoken to her with kindness, had secretly signed her up for the show, not as a gesture of encouragement, but as a cruel prank. They submitted her act under the title, Mira Lane Solo Vocal. When Mira saw her name printed on the performance schedule, taped to the school bulletin board for everyone to see, her heart sank like a stone. Panic rose in her chest. She hadn't signed up. She would never have dared. She rushed to the assistant teacher, voice trembling, trying to explain the mistake. But her words were brushed aside. The list is already finalized, the teacher said with a sigh. If you don't perform, it will be seen as disrespectful. Just do your best. That morning, the school auditorium buzzed with energy. Rows upon rows of students filled the seats, laughing, chattering, their sneakers squeaking against the polished wooden floor. The MC stood confidently on stage with a wireless mic clipped to his collar, calling out each act with exaggerated excitement. Backstage, Mira could barely breathe. The sound of her own name over the loudspeaker made her knees go weak. Next up, Mira Lane, performing a solo vocal piece. A wave of laughter rippled through the crowd. A few students exchanged smirks. They remembered Mira stumbling over her words during class readings. The girl who stuttered. The girl who never spoke unless spoken to. And now that same girl was about to sing. They leaned back, waiting for the spectacle. Mira stood slowly. Her legs shook beneath her, her stomach twisted into knots. Every step toward the stage felt like a punishment. Under the spotlight, hundreds of eyes fixed on her. Curious, mocking, indifferent. No one in that room could feel the quiet agony burning inside her. No one knew the fear in the heart of a child forced to stand before a crowd that didn't see her as human, but as entertainment. She walked to the center of the stage. Her hands were clenched so tightly at her sides, her knuckles had turned pale. The microphone towered over her, far too tall. She couldn't even reach it. Frozen, she turned to the MC, eyes wide with helplessness. Her silent plea was clear, "Please help me." But he didn't move. The room stirred, whispers filled the air. Some students giggled behind their hands, others murmured cruel jokes. She heard someone whisper, "She's going to cry." Another voice laughed, "What a joke." And just as the humiliation began to crescendo, just as Mira stood, lost and trembling, at the edge of collapse, someone unexpected moved. An elderly woman stood up at the back of the auditorium. From the back row, she rose, quietly, gracefully. She wore a faded chestnut knit coat that hung a little loose around her small frame. Her silver hair, neatly tied in a bun, glimmered under the lights. In her hand, she held a curved wooden cane, which tapped softly against the floor with each careful step. Her pace was slow, but there was something about her eyes, sharp, unwavering, that held the room still. The buzzing whispers began. "Isn't that Mrs. Evelyn?" someone murmured. "She's the janitor, right? The one who cleans the music room." Indeed, she was. Every morning, Mrs. Evelyn could be seen pushing a cleaning cart down the hallways, adjusting music stands, dusting off forgotten instruments. Most students barely noticed her. She was background, invisible, but not today. She approached Mira with a quiet confidence, stopping just a step away from the trembling girl. Bending slightly, she leaned in and whispered, not loud enough for the crowd to hear, but just enough for Mira to feel the warmth in her voice. "If you want to sing, I'll play for you," she said gently. "If you want to walk away, I'll walk with you. But I believe there's something inside you they just don't see." Mira looked up into her face. There was no judgment in Mrs. Evelyn's eyes. No pity, just sincerity. A kind of truth that made Mira's fear pause, even if just for a moment. No one in that auditory had any idea what was about to happen. The room, once alive with whispers and giggles, began to fall quiet. Slowly, Mrs. Evelyn stepped forward and adjusted the microphone to Mira's height. Then, she turned to the MC and spoke in a voice both calm and commanding. "I'd like to use the piano in the corner of the stage if the school doesn't mind." The MC hesitated. He looked unsure. But from the front row, the principal gave a small, approving nod. That was all she needed. The room stilled, breathless. Mrs. Evelyn crossed the stage to the old electric piano that sat neglected, dust gathering on its cover. She pulled out the bench, sat down with purpose, and placed her hands gently on the keys. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. No one in that room really knew who this woman was. To them, she was the quiet janitor, the one who arrived before dawn and stayed long after school let out. She was the one who set up the chairs for the school band, who carefully wound microphone cables, who moved silently through their lives without fanfare or thanks. But none of them knew her truth. Once, decades ago, Evelyn Moore had been someone, a gifted vocal instructor at the Boston Conservatory. She had trained the voices that went on to light Broadway stages. She had walked the grand halls of Carnegie and stood behind velvet curtains in Vienna. Her students had won Tony Awards. Her mailbox had once overflowed with invitations from symphonies and opera houses. But then her world stopped. Her only daughter, her light, her melody, died in a tragic accident. After that, Evelyn disappeared. She sold her home, turned down the offers, vanished from the world that once celebrated her, and one day, without explanation, she applied for a janitorial job at Eldon's school. She asked for nothing but the key to the music room. And so she became what the children called her, the piano cleaning lady. Now, after all these years, her hands rested once again on the keys, not for glory, not for applause, but for one reason only: to protect a little girl from being broken by cruelty. On stage, Mira still hadn't moved. Her knees shook, her throat was dry, tears stung at the corners of her eyes. Mrs. Evelyn turned her head slightly, meeting Mira's eyes once more. "You don't have to be perfect," she said softly. "Just sing with everything real inside of you, Mrs." Evelyn began to play. The notes were soft, deliberate, the unmistakable opening to "You Raise Me Up," a simple song, easy, yes, but rich with feeling. And for Mira, familiar. Her breath caught in her throat. That melody. Her mother used to hum it at night, just before turning off the light. It had once filled their tiny home with warmth. Now it stirred something inside her. Something buried under years of grief and silence. She closed her eyes, then opened them. The crowd was still watching, some curious, some doubtful. But this time, Mira didn't look away. She took a shaky breath and sang. The first few lines were fragile, like paper in the wind. Her voice trembled, her pitch wavered. But Mrs. Evelyn didn't falter. Her hands moved steadily across the piano, never pushing, never rushing. Every chord was like a hand reaching out, guiding Mira forward through the storm. By the third line, something changed. Mira's voice, though not powerful or polished, grew steadier, more sure. It wasn't the voice of a trained singer. It was the voice of a girl who had carried too much sorrow for someone her age. And that sorrow, that raw truth, wove itself into the music like thread in a tapestry. Slowly, the auditorium quieted, the laughter had stopped. Even the whispers died out. A girl who used to tease Mira lowered her eyes, lips pressed together, suddenly unsure. The music teacher sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly at her chest. In the back, Mrs. Evelyn did something unexpected. She began to harmonize, softly, gently, like a lullaby drifting on the wind. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It wrapped around Mira's like ivy around a tree, lifting the melody with tenderness, not pride. And Mira, she sang with her whole heart. She didn't know if she was singing or crying anymore. Images of her mother flooded her mind, pale in that hospital bed. The soft smile, the warm hand that held hers until the end. And somehow, in this moment, Mira wasn't just singing. She was reaching. Reaching through pain, through time, through fear, as if trying to send one last message to the heavens. You raise me up to more than I can be. In the third row, an older boy, usually loud and hard-faced, gripped his father's shoulder tightly. His father, a veteran in a wheelchair, blinked through misty eyes and gave a small, knowing nod toward the stage. He had known fear, he had known pain, and now through this voice he felt something lift. When the final note faded, the auditorium didn't erupt in applause. Not at first. There was only stillness. Reverent, as if something sacred had just passed through them all, and they needed a moment to understand it. Then, the principal stood. He began to clap, one person, then another, then the entire room. Applause surged like a wave crashing against the walls. Students stood, teachers wiped their eyes. Even the skeptical ones found themselves clapping with both hands. But Mira didn't smile. Instead, she turned to Mrs. Evelyn, still seated at the piano, her fingers resting on the keys, her eyes wet but calm, like someone who had found something they'd long forgotten. Mira walked over, bowed her head, and whispered, "I don't even know what I just did, but I know without you, I wouldn't have been able to sing a single note." Mrs. Evelyn reached out and gently placed her hand over Mira's. "It wasn't because of me," she said softly. "It was because you dared to raise your voice. And that, my dear, is something not everyone is brave enough to do." The performance was over, but something lingered, something that settled deep in the walls of Eldon School, like dust that refused to be swept away. The next morning the school halls buzzed, but not about the magic tricks or hip-hop routines. No one was talking about who danced best or who missed a beat. Instead, they whispered about Mira Lane and Mrs. Evelyn, the woman they used to call the piano lady. Did she really sing? A boy asked in disbelief. Not just sing, someone replied. It was like she told a whole story with just her voice. And that old lady, another added. She played better than our music teacher. At the far end of the schoolyard, under the shade of an old maple tree, Mira sat with a book open in her lap. Her usual spot, but today something was different. The stares were gone, no more snickers, no whispered jokes behind her back. A few classmates passed by. They slowed down, as if they wanted to say something, maybe even apologize. But the words didn't come, and they kept walking. Then, from across the yard, a girl from an upper grade approached. She looked unsure of herself, fidgeting with a small paper napkin in her hands. On it was a single, homemade cookie. She placed it gently on Mira's desk. "You really sang beautifully," she mumbled. "I'm sorry I used to laugh at you." Mira blinked, startled. She didn't quite know what to say. so she just gave a small, awkward nod, but inside something softened. That small gesture, that quiet apology, it landed deeper than the girl could have ever known. But while kindness was blossoming in small corners of the school, not everyone was pleased. Inside the administrative office, a meeting had been called. Urgent. The assistant administrator, clearly agitated, flipped through a stack of policies. "We can't allow a janitorial staff member to perform in front of students," he insisted. "It violates procedure. It could damage the school's image." The room was tense. The principal sat quietly, fingers interlocked, gaze steady on the window. He had been the first to stand and applaud. He had felt something stir that night, something real. Finally, he looked up and said, "If what happened yesterday was a mistake, then it was the most beautiful mistake I've ever witnessed." Meanwhile, across campus, Mrs. Evelyn was back in the music room. The same piano, the same dusty windows. Her hands moved slowly as she cleaned the keys, not out of duty, but reverence. But her fingers trembled slightly. Not from age. From fear, she had stepped out of the shadows. Just for a moment, and part of her was afraid she had overstepped. That someone would remind her she didn't belong in the light anymore. Then, footsteps. Mira entered, her canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She smiled. "No one laughed at me today," she said softly. Mrs. Evelyn smiled too, gently, with a knowing look. "That's because yesterday," she replied, "you sang from a place people can't laugh at." From the heart, Mira sat down beside her. There was a quiet between them now, not awkward, just calm. "Did you used to sing in front of big crowds?" Mira asked. The question caught Evelyn off guard. For a second, it was like a dusty door in her memory creaked open. "I once stood in front of 200 people in Boston," she said slowly. The stage lights were blinding, the applause endless. She paused. "But then one phone call, and I disappeared from those lights." Mira didn't ask more. She didn't need to. She understood, some griefs don't need words. After a moment, her expression changed, more serious. "If I get to sing again, would you play for me?" Mrs. Evelyn tilted her head. "Why do you want to sing?" Mira hesitated, then blushed. "For my mom," she whispered. "And maybe also for you." Mrs. Evelyn gave a slight nod. That was enough. No more words were needed. The following week, a shaky video clip of the performance was uploaded to the school's online bulletin. No filters, no edits. Just the raw moment. Within 2 days, it had over 20,000 views. Local media began to take notice. A reporter from the regional paper called the school office, requesting an interview with the girl who sang like an angel and the woman who awakened an entire auditorium with a piano. Then, on a quiet Thursday morning, Mira received a letter, handwritten, with the gold-embossed seal of the Wellington School of Music. It read, "Your voice is not yet trained, but it holds something that technique alone cannot create, raw, honest emotion. We would love to hear you sing again. A summer scholarship for elementary students with musical potential." Mira read the letter over and over, her fingers trembling. Then she ran, down the hall, past the lockers, through the art corridor until she reached the music room. She held it up to Mrs. Evelyn, eyes wide with disbelief. Mrs. Evelyn read it slowly, then looked at her, her voice quiet and steady. "This is your path," she said, placing a hand gently on Mira's shoulder. I only opened the gate, but in that growing light, a shadow began to creep in. The head of the school's parent association had filed a formal complaint. They claimed that allowing a staff member, particularly a janitorial worker, to intervene on stage disrupted school standards. It blurred professional boundaries, and now, the same woman who had brought an auditorium to its feet with nothing but a piano was at risk of losing her job. The Eldon School Parent Association meeting was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon. The same multipurpose room that once celebrated honor roll students now clung to the air. Tension clung to the air. Banners that once read, "Excellence in Education," now hung and forgotten on the walls. Eyes were sharp, faces cold. At the front stood Janet Stroud, president of the Parent Association, middle-aged, with tight blonde curls and a voice that didn't ask for attention, but demanded it. Her presence alone silenced side conversations. She cleared her throat, looked around the room, and said, Janet Stroud stood at the front of the room, spine straight, voice firm and controlled as she addressed the circle of concerned parents and staff. "We are here to discuss discipline and boundaries within school activities," she began, her words clipped and authoritative. "It is entirely unacceptable for a janitor, regardless of who she is, to step onto the stage and perform without prior authorization or administrative approval. Several parents nodded. A few murmured their agreement. The mood in the room was one of stiff formality, laced with unease. Another voice chimed in from a father seated near the back. If we allow this, what message does it send? That anyone can walk up and take part in school events without vetting. That's not how institutions should run. In the corner of the room, Mrs. Evelyn sat quietly. She didn't speak. She didn't defend herself. Her gaze remained lowered, fixed on her trembling hands. Those hands had once guided children through their first scales. Those hands had once held her daughters, pale and weak, as life slipped quietly away. And just days ago, those same hands had steadied Mira's when the girl could barely breathe from fear. The principal leaned forward, trying to bridge the growing divide. I believe what happened that day, he said. Though it may have been unplanned, created a moment this school will never forget. Students were inspired, parents were moved to tears. No harm was done, except perhaps to some expectations. His eyes lingered on the group. Let's not allow bureaucracy to bury something beautiful. But Janet wouldn't back down. We cannot? She snapped. A low sentiment to override procedure. Emotions fade. Precedent remains. This is about structure, about boundaries. Outside the meeting room, Mira sat on a wooden bench in the hallway. The letter from the Wellington School of Music was resting on her lap, but her fingers were clutched tightly around a different piece of paper. A smaller one. A handwritten letter. One she had spent all night writing. Her head was bowed, not in shame, but because her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. When the end of class bell rang, she stood, one deep breath, and then another. She walked to the meeting room door and raised her hand. Knock, knock. 3 deliberate taps. Inside, the room fell silent. The principal rose and opened the door. Surprise flickered across his face at the sight of her, but then his eyes softened. You may speak, he said gently. Just for a few minutes, Mira stepped inside. The air was thick with tension. All the adults turned to look at her. She stood straight, though her knees trembled beneath her skirt. My name is Mira Lane, she began, her voice wavering. And I'm the student Mrs. Evelyn helped during the school performance. No one moved. No one spoke. I was never supposed to sing that day, she continued. No one believed I could. Not even me. I was terrified. But Mrs. Evelyn, she did. She believed in me. Her voice caught, but she pushed forward. She didn't believe because I was talented. I wasn't. She believed because she saw I was afraid. And she didn't want me to face that stage alone. All eyes turned to Mrs. Evelyn, still seated quietly at the edge of the room, her expression unreadable. She never asked for recognition. She didn't want praise. She just wanted to help. And I'm only standing here now because of her. Mira paused, took a breath, and looked straight at Janet. I know my voice isn't perfect, but it's mine now. And if this school fires Mrs. Evelyn, you're not just punishing a kind woman. You're telling every student that kindness doesn't belong here. She looked down, pulled out the piece of paper in her hand, and held it out. I wrote this in case it's needed. I'd be willing to read it during the Monday morning assembly. Because if you won't let her speak, then I will. A hush fell over the room. Thick and weighty. No one clapped, no one objected. Just silence, the same kind that had followed her performance on stage a week earlier. Finally, a younger mother in the back of the room spoke. Her voice was soft but clear. My daughter came home after that performance and asked me, Mom, if I ever get laughed at in front of everyone, would you come stand with me? The woman paused, her eyes damp. I cried. Because I wasn't sure I would be as brave as Mrs. Evelyn. Janet's shoulders dropped. Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked around the room. The same parents who had nodded earlier were now avoiding eye contact. Their thoughts caught somewhere between policy and humanity. The meeting didn't end with a vote. It didn't need one. Mrs. Evelyn was never fired. And on Monday morning, Mira stood before the entire school, letter in hand, voice steady. She read her words aloud. Every student listened. Every teacher stood. Even the janitorial staff paused in the hallway to hear her speak. By then, the performance wasn't just a moment. It had become a movement. A quiet reminder that courage doesn't always come from the loudest voices, and that sometimes it takes just one trembling song to shake the walls of a system. And Mira Lane, she was no longer just the quiet girl. She was the voice that made them all listen. Then she sat down. She said nothing more, but her silence said everything. 2 days later, an official notice was distributed across the school campus. Mrs. Evelyn Moore will be appointed as community music advisor. supporting students passionate about the performing arts. Beneath it, in smaller print, was a quiet acknowledgement. There are some lessons that cannot be taught in textbooks, only learned by heart. The following Monday, under a clear sky, during school assembly, Mira stood before the entire student body and read her letter. This time she did not tremble. This time she did not bow her head, and when she finished, she looked up. At the end of the front row, Mrs. Evelyn stood quietly in the morning sun. No piano, no spotlight, just her hand gently resting over her heart and a smile soft, quiet like the first breeze of spring. Summer came, casting golden light over the red rooftops of Cambridge, where the Wellington School of Music sat nestled among blooming lavender and birdsong. Here, Mira Lane, the girl who had once been the subject of ridicule, entered the final week of her summer scholarship for young musicians with extraordinary potential. For an entire month, Mira had trained in voice expression and presence. But most importantly, for the first time, she stood among peers who didn't mock, only listened. Her vocal coach once said, "She sings like each note holds a secret she's trusting the world to hear." But what puzzled Mira most was the requirement for the final performance. Each student must perform a solo, or a duet with the person who inspired their musical journey. Mira didn't hesitate. That evening, inside a grand performance hall bathed in soft golden light, the seats were filled with families, faculty, and visiting guests. No one noticed the elderly woman in the third row, her silver hair pulled neatly back, her plum-colored knit coat buttoned to the collar. Mrs. Evelyn Moore. In her lap, she held a thick envelope, something she hadn't yet shown Mira. Inside was an official invitation from a National Music Education Foundation asking her to serve as an honorary instructor. The video of Mira's school performance had gone viral, reaching over 5 million views in just 2 weeks. Backstage, Mira took a breath that felt heavier than all the ones before. When the announcer called her name, she stepped forward into the warm spotlight. But not alone, Mrs. Evelyn walked beside her, hand in hand. She leaned in and whispered gently, "I once thought my story was over, but you gave me one more verse." They bowed together. Mira looked out at the audience, her voice clear and strong. "I'd like to sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It's a lullaby my mother used to sing to me. And tonight, I want to sing it with the woman who gave me the courage to dream again." Mrs. Evelyn began the piano intro. Her fingers moved with graceful precision, slow and steady. When Mira began to sing, the entire auditorium fell still, every ear tuned in, every breath held. She sang of longing, of loss, of a world she dreamed could be softer, kinder, of a mother's memory and a hope that refused to die. And then, midway through the chorus, another voice joined hers, low, warm, and timeless. Mrs. Evelyn, 2 generations, 1 song. One message: it's never too early to believe in yourself, and never too late to raise your voice. When the final note faded into silence, the applause was thunderous. Among the crowd, a special guest, music director from PBS, stood with glassy eyes and a hand over his chest. That night, beneath the old oak trees behind the music school, Mira and Mrs. Evelyn sat together on a wooden bench. The air smelled of freshly cut grass. The stars above sparkled like stage lights in a sky that never closed its curtain. Evelyn handed Mira the envelope. Mira opened it, skimmed the first lines, then gasped, "They want you to teach in Washington, D.C., Ms." Evelyn smiled softly. "Do you think I should accept?" Mira didn't even hesitate. "No one deserves it more." Then she added, her voice playful but sincere, "And if I study there one day, will you still play piano for me, Mrs.?" Evelyn looked toward the sky, "Until my hands can play no more." Above them, the stars shimmered brighter, as if to say honest voices are never lost. And so, the story of Mira Lane and Mrs. Evelyn Moore finds its final chord. A girl with a trembling voice, a woman with trembling hands. Together, they built a bridge between generations, where music, courage, and kindness turned a quiet spark into a fire that moved an entire auditorium. If this story touched your heart in any way, please share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe, so we can keep telling stories that remind us all of the quiet power of belief. See you in the next journey.